Going into round 3 of Norway Chess, the world champion had no points on the scoreboard. He lost his first 2 games. He had a tough opponent, Hikaru Nakamura, who's doing very well. Of course, in the previous round, he defeated Magnus Carlsen in their Armageddon game. So, not an easy one. Mind you, there are absolutely no easy games in this tournament. Gukesh, world champion. He is 19 years old tomorrow on the 29th of May. So could he give himself an early birthday present? Let's have a look. For the record, Naka is 37 years old. He's an old man. So gioca piano. Knight f6 and d3. And instead of bishop c5, Nakamura goes for bishop e7. So a very, very solid system. And d6. So once the e-pawn is protected, then this knight is free to move. So black actually has a threat in this position to play knight a5 and to take that bishop. Remember, bishops are stronger than knights generally, and that is an absolutely beautiful piece. So knight a5 is a threat. That's why a4 was played, to give the bishop some room, an escape square. And also sometimes white can gain space with a5. Now, Naka played knight a5 anyway, so the bishop dropped back. Now, the idea of this is to play c5 and gain some space and influence in the centre. Now, black doesn't have to play like this. I mean, you could just play bishop e6 to exchange off this bishop. It's another way of playing. Anyway, c5, bishop d2 knocks back the knights, and knight a3. So in this way, Gukesh gets some control over c4. h6. So sometimes it's possible to play a bishop here to exchange and get some control over d5. But also, Nakamura wants to play the bishop to e6, and after the exchange doesn't want to have to deal with knight g5. So h6, in this case, is a pretty useful move. c3, so that covers these squares and prepares something else as well. Bishop e6, so this is the dangerous piece. So Nakamura exchanges it off with bishop e6. So an exchange. But, I mean, now we have an interesting pawn structure. You know, this central clump can be quite good for black. Sometimes you might be able to play d5. The pawn supports or controls d5 and f5. And now black has a semi-open f-file. But these pawns are a bit rigid. So there are pros and cons to having this structure. And in fact, after b4, so that's the move that Gukesh was planning with these moves, Gukesh now has the initiative. And I think it's a very pleasant position for white, actually. So there's a threat to exchange, and that would isolate these pawns. So b6, knight c4. The knight spins into the game. Queen e8 played by Nakamura. And b5, so pushing the knight back. And Gukesh decides to break in the middle with d4 just to break up those pawns. There's another very attractive continuation for white, and that's to play queen b3. So black simply isn't playing d5 because the e-pawn is on. And white wants to play a5 and, you know, start hammering down the a-file, basically. You know, black's pieces here don't look very impressive. I mean, to my eyes, this is a very easy way of playing the position for white, and to my eyes, a nice advantage. But Gukesh plays in a very different way. He wants to blow open the centre and create a weakness. So lots of pawns exchanged. and bishop b4, attacking the pawn on d6. So that's a little bit awkward for black. And Nakamura responds with this little tactic. Okay, a very typical tactic, of course. That's taken, and now d5 is going to win back a piece because of this fork. It also opens up this diagonal. But those are exchanged off. We've got lots of exchanges now. Rook takes and pawn takes. So Nakamura's got his piece back. So white to play, and at this moment Gukesh thought for almost 18 minutes. And I was rather surprised with the way he played. I mean, there's a simple way of playing here, and that's rook c1 and then recapturing the pawn. Because white's coordination is really good here. You know, it's always the idea to come down and hit the 7th rank. Or maybe go to c6 to hit the e-pawn. Everything is nicely protected. I like the knight on f3 because it lends protection to white's king and very solid. The queen will probably land on e2, and there's a little bit of pressure here. So all in all, I think a very pleasant position for white to play. There are simply no weaknesses in white's position. Knight e5 looks a little bit loose to me. So Gukesh clearly wanted to recapture the pawn with the knight. That's what he's done. And, you know, maybe he's looking to spin into d6. Who knows? But that was covered. But you see, I prefer my minor pieces to be protected. That's why I like it on f3. And I know it's protected by the rook at the moment, but it's a little bit loose. Queen 2, knight c5. So Nakamura brings his knight round to protect the e-pawn and also looks at the pawn on a4. Rook d1. Nakamura could have taken that pawn. I mean, white is more comfortable there. But I'm not sure this is a big deal for white. But anyway, rook f4. This is also okay. To trade pieces and getting closer to a draw. a5 played by Gukesh. So this kind of blows the position apart. So that pawn was a little bit loose. But after the exchange, you can see that, well, have a look at white's pieces. Someone very wise said loose pieces drop off. John Nunn, actually. You have to be very careful when pieces are unprotected. And both rook and knight are loose. Also, white's king is potentially vulnerable on the back rank. Then again, you could say that this knight has been destabilised because it's no longer protected by the pawn on b6. And there are potentially targets here as well. So I just find it really interesting the way that Gukesh has played. He's just blown up the position and he's relying on tactics to see him through, that he'll spot any threats somehow to his loose pieces. But to my eyes, it's a risky way to play. Rook d8. So bringing the rook into the game, and because of the weak back rank, it really is time to exchange. And also, the knight moves into c6, attacking the queen, of course, and the pawn on a7. So, I mean, there's no doubt that Gukesh has a little bit of initiative here, given that these pawns are a little bit weak and the knight is loose. But is it enough to win? Nakamura played queen d7 here, which looks very natural, just to cover these pawns. But it turns out to be a mistake. Queen b6 is a better move. And the point is this, that actually black is going to play a5 or a6 to liquidate these pawns, and there's not a lot that white can do about that. I mean, it does get a little bit tricky if white wants to play like this and throw the queen down here. But actually, well, black gets away with this. The point is off b takes, knight takes. That knight can't be taken because of the back rank mate. So yes, maybe it seems a little bit funny to do this, but this is the move. That's the computer move. Computer thinks it's a draw. But queen d7, yeah, maybe that's a more human move because the queen remains centralized and protects these pawns. But there is a problem. So first of all, h4. Well, that's very sensible because now the king has an escape square from the back rank. But also, it could cramp black's kingside and create a little mating net. Now, what about a6? This could equalize the game immediately if these pawns are exchanged. But in fact, there's a fantastic riposte. Now, this did not happen, and I suspect that Nakamura saw this, and maybe this was his original intention, who knows. So this didn't happen, but have a look. This is very important. Queen e5. So hitting the knight, and after knight d3, check. And here's the crucial bit. Queen f8. And there's the mating net. Threatening queen g8. And not a lot black can do about that. Fantastic idea. And it's kind of surprising. Queen e5 is incredibly strong. It just hits black where he hurts. Just a little bit of detail. If the king steps up, then white takes on a6, queen takes, and queen b7 check. And the pawn goes through. Okay, so that's the problem. This queen coming to e5 and actually starting an attack against the king. And yeah, I talked about loose pieces. That knight is loose, and that pawn is loose as well. And the king is under fire. So that's why Nakamura played queen d6. I mean, it seems a bit funny to play like that, but he was very worried about this. So knight takes pawn. There we are. So now it is the famed matter of technique. Gukesh is a pawn up. Could he finish it off? King h8. Queen f3. Yeah, these pieces are now, they're solid. So basically the queen needs to enter the game. But first, okay, let's give the king a little bit of protection. So it can now step up here if necessary. Well, not in that position, but you get my meaning. The knight c5 and now king g2. That's nice and safe off the back rank. And the queen creeps forward. I mean, there's not a lot that black can do. Queen d5 check, king h2, king h7, and the queen creeps in, and that's an absolute killer. So now we're back to this idea of knight e7 and creating a mating net. Knight d3, knight e7, attacks the queen. Has to defend the g8 square, and that's pawn at number 2. Well, Nakamura didn't want that. He took that one, but that loses. This is the final move of the game. Queen f5 check. King h8, and now white wins with knight g6. And you first get the knight out of the way and take there. So obviously white is a piece up with that passed pawn as well. So Gukesh gives himself an early birthday present with that win over Hikaru Nakamura, who looked to be on very good form. But yeah, I found it very interesting because, you know, my instincts would be to play this position in a very different way. and to keep the position quite closed, actually. So back here, b5 and queen b3 and a5 later on. But yeah, instead Gukesh blew the position open. And then in this position, to my mind, again, this keeps everything nicely under control. Everything is beautifully protected, the knight included. But no, Gukesh went wandering with this knight. And in the end, actually it was tactics with the queen and knight that decided the game in his favour. And indeed, that knight found a beautiful spot on c6, which was enough to bamboozle Hikaru Nakamura. Now, let me see in the other games. Fabiano Caruana won again. He defeated Arjun Erigaisi in a crazy game. Carlsen drew his classical game against Wei Yi, but lost the Armageddon again. So he's lost 2 Armageddon games. It's extraordinary. And, well, let's have a look at the table. Caruana 6, Carlsen 5, Erigaisi and Nakamura 4.5. Gukesh bounces up to 3, and Wei Yi has 2.5. It's very tense stuff. Every round is producing some absolute thrillers. I hope you're enjoying the tournament. And don't forget, I'm giving a patron-only broadcast, a masterclass, this coming Friday at 1900 hours UK time. So if you want to join in, then do subscribe to patreon.com/PowerPlayChess.